Lonesome Dove has been called the great American novel, the greatest Western ever written, and a lot of people say it's their favorite book. But is it overrated? We're going to talk about that today and more on the Life on Books podcast. Welcome back. I'm your host, Toni. With me, as always, is Andy, a.k.a. Metafictional Meathead. What's up?
Morning, Toni.
How we doing?
Doing well. Happy to be here.
Fantastic. So this is obviously quite a popular novel, released in 1986, I believe, won the Pulitzer Prize. It's quite long, nearly 900 pages in this Simon & Schuster paperback edition. But before we dig into that, of course, we're going to start with our weekly reading update. 1985, the year I was born, great year. And, of course, as we always do, we're going to be talking about what we've been reading recently. Feel free to let us know because as readers, we all enjoy living vicariously through one another. Why is it that just the mention of I'm reading this or that is so appealing to a reader? I don't know.
That's a question for another podcast.
Yeah. So why don't you kick things off, Andy? What have you been reading this week?
Well, mostly this week I've been reading Lonesome Dove.
Yep.
I had talked about in previous episodes I'd fallen a little bit behind just reading other things and doing other things with my life.
Sure. As one does.
So I, wanted to play catch up with this. I believe I finished it on Thursday night. Yeah, Thursday night. So since then I've gotten a little bit of Against the Day. And I know last week I talked about how I'd started reading the Lispector biography, Why This World, which I've read a little bit more of in the last couple days. But again, mostly Lonesome Dove. It's funny. I think it was in the comments of on YouTube of the most recent episode that we uploaded that someone also talked about having read the Lispector biography. Because, that's when I was talking about Moser and how he might not be this great guy or whatever. And I think they said something along the lines of like, there's a lot of useless facts in there. Yeah. Which I'm kind of starting to run into.
Yeah, I think it was Jack Walter who had said that.
Okay, was that? Yeah.
He was part of our Patreon group and always has pretty insightful commentary on our in the comment section of our episodes. So that's unfortunate.
Yeah, there was so obviously her family fled from Ukraine and moved to Brazil. And there was a whole section that's all about that was I don't know if I'd say the politics, but about the Dutch settlers of the region in Brazil where she ended up settling as a child. It's okay, I don't care at all.
Yeah.
I
do think there's a tendency in biographies to they're lauded for how thorough they can be.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it is just kind of like a series of facts,
right?
But for me, I'm more just give me the highlights. And
I don't want to say that it is totally useless. It doesn't add to kind of this overall picture of her life, but it could have been a much quicker, just kind of a snapshot of what things were like in this region before the Lispector family moved there.
Sure,
and then could have just gone on with the Lispector family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't need a history lesson of 300 years before they got there.
Sure. Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
But that's about it for me. Oh yeah, and I said I've been reading Against the Day, so I've got about a little over 300 pages left. So hopefully by next weekend I'll be done.
Yeah, I'm starting to sound like a broken record, chipping away at Infinite Jest. Obviously, it's a large book that would take someone a long time to read anyway, but combining that with the fact that also reading Lonesome Dove, which is quite long, and trying to mix in some shorter reads at the same time, it just has slowed everything down.
I think it's funny. We've both kind of been on the same track the last few weeks. Lonesome Dove, which in comparison to the other books we're reading is not really that difficult of a read, but it's still very long and time-consuming.
Right.
And then also we've paired it with very long, very complex, and difficult reads. And now we're staring down the face of the tunnel.
I was going to say, no end in sight as we're going to start the tunnel as kind of an unofficial group read. Obviously, Lonesome Dove was the pick for October book club for Life on Books. And then for November, we're doing Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. we've talked about this before. The reason why we didn't select The Tunnel as a potential candidate, one, it's an incredibly challenging work. It's long, but it's out of print and it's hard to come by an affordable copy.
Yeah.
I feel a bit bad saying that because I now have 5 copies of it, which was not my intention to acquire all of them. But yeah, if you have a copy of it and you want to join in, we're kind of just having a very casual group chat on Instagram, so you can message either of us to get in on that. And
Yeah, no real like set schedule like we do with the official book club. You know, a rough idea of like pages per week, but again,
yeah,
you know,
I would like to finish it before the end of 2024, but we'll see what happens.
yeah, it's
So-
certainly not one that you want to like blast through, and
Right.
it's
You want to take your time with
take
it.
your time with it. It also would just in general be like hard to blast through. I think I talked about it before. There are like with hard books that I've read, you know, like I'll read X number of pages and kind of feel like, okay, maybe I could keep reading, but I'm worn out. You know, I've gotten enough from the day. If I keep reading anymore, I'm just going to overwhelm myself and not really pick up on whatever is going to happen in this next like 2 chapters or 20 pages or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But like there were times where I read The Tunnel where I'd get like 10 pages and be like, nope, not. I'm done. Like I can't.
Yeah,
Just like worn out.
it gives me pause because a lot of people have said it's a very challenging book, but one person in particular who really stressed its difficulty was our friend Seth, aka Waste Mailing List, who we did a great episode with about postmodernism literature. So check that out if you haven't seen it yet. But he reads some of the most challenging literature ever written as kind of his normal daily stuff. And I'm like, oh God, if Seth's saying that, like,
Yeah.
I'm in for it. So
I would say, you know, I've probably said it before, but I think like it's for the hardest books I've ever read. It's 1A and 1B, Gravity's Rainbow and The Tunnel.
Nice.
Like,
Sign me
so
up.
I'm excited to go back in because, you know, with our failed attempt of a Gravity's Rainbow group read last year, or whenever that was, you know, that was my second time reading it. And it just, you know, so much more had kind of like stuck out to me and had so much more of an effect on me. So I'm excited to see how a second round with The Tunnel goes.
Yeah. So other than chipping away at Infinite Jest and finishing up Lonesome Dove, I also read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. Actually brought the copy out here so I could have it on hand as my dogs are making a ton of noise in the other room. We talked about last week bookish red flags.
Yep.
And we had talked about very popular books kind of being a turnoff for me. You said dark academia as a genre as a turnoff for you. I had said I had read Babel and I had a copy of this, but kind of was like, you know, I've heard a lot. It's very different. And so I just thought, I'll pull it off the shelf. I had a copy sitting there. I'll give it a go. I think this book is fantastic.
Really?
Actually, I actually think you would like this.
Interesting.
Just loosely, and this is no real spoilers because this is kind of covered in the synopsis, but it's about a woman who has a more or less failed writing career.
Mm-hmm.
And she's friends with a very successful Asian woman who has had a successful writing career. And she ends up plagiarizing one of that woman's works and kind of, you know, profiting off of it. And the book follows the fallout that entails from that, or follows from that. And it really touches on a lot of the cliches of the publishing industry, a lot of the issues in the publishing industry. And it reminded me a lot of American Fiction, the movie, which we discussed in the Patreon episode a few weeks back, about how there is a push to maybe promote voices that have been previously not given the same opportunity, but at the same time flattening those into like two-dimensional, you either write about being an oppressed person or you don't get in type of thing. So it touches on that. Very satirical, very funny. I was really surprised by the very gritty moments of it. Like Kwong kind of took off the kid gloves. There's a lot of adult language and like themes.
Okay.
Super readable, very easy to read. I read it in 2 sittings essentially.
Okay.
It's like 320 pages. So she just posted on Instagram maybe a week or 2 ago that this has crossed the 1 million copies sold threshold.
Wow.
And I would say one of the few books I've read that just like, yeah, I get it. I understand, the hype. So
Interesting.
props to Kwong for that. There is a David Foster Wallace mention in this book.
Nice.
Not in a necessarily positive light. But
I'm not surprised.
That's okay. I've actually heard this talked about before. She's the protagonist is talking about writers surviving scandals.
Yep.
And I've heard this mentioned before that there's some accusations about Wallace like stalking one of his ex-partners who's also a writer, Mary Carr, I believe her name is. And so I know that was like a criticism of actually Wallace's biography, that the author of that did not really
I've heard that as well.
pay service to
I
that.
didn't really cover it.
Kind
Yeah.
of skimmed it,
Yeah.
which, I do think a good biography should kind of cover the good and the bad.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not, unfamiliar with the criticisms of Wallace's character related to his relationship with Mary Carr.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a discussion for a different episode, but yeah, he maybe wasn't the best partner and or ex-partner.
Yeah.
Probably was not. I should say maybe. He probably wasn't.
Probably was not. Yeah. And the other book I've started but I haven't finished yet is China Dream by Jian, which is translated by Flora Drew, I think her name is.
Okay.
And this is very interesting. So it's kind of just, again, looking at my shelf, knowing, okay, we're starting The Tunnel, we're starting Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. I'm going to start both of those tomorrow. What's like something quick that I can just kind of go through, and it's been on my shelf for a while, and so I saw this book that I acquired a while back, and I did a little bit of Googling about it before I started reading it, and every single one of this guy's books are banned in China by default now. Like, he wrote one book and China was like, nope,
never again.
and now he's literally exiled.
Wow.
So he's from China and he's exiled in London.
Wow.
So it's wildly funny. It's again, a satire of, it follows this guy who's the head of the China Dream Bureau. And their whole mission is to unite the country with one dream. And he has this goal of creating a device that will wipe out everyone else's current dreams, so they can all focus on the one China dream of becoming like this great nation.
I love it.
It's very funny. I have maybe 40 or 50 pages left, so
Nice.
I'll probably finish that this afternoon. So yeah. All right, you ready to dig into Lonesome Dove?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, so just so you know, this episode will be spoiler free. So if you've not read the novel, you don't have to worry about any spoilers. However, for our Patreon members, we do post at least 2 additional podcast episodes a month exclusively in Patreon, and part of that will be the spoiler inclusion portion will be for the Patreon members because they're in the book club. So if you want to participate in the spoiler part of the conversation, got to sign up for the Patreon. That's my plug. I
was really surprised when the aliens showed up. That was crazy.
yeah, exactly. The inspiration for Cowboys versus Aliens. I can't think of a book that I've read in a long time that I've had such a complicated feeling and relationship with. So I have a lot of good and bad things to say, but let's start with the positives.
Yeah.
What did you like about Lonesome Dove?
I thought it was a very compelling narrative. None of it felt like super unrealistic. Like, why are they doing this? Like, obviously, there's some depth to this book, but it is a largely narrative driven novel. And sometimes when you run into that, like, the narrative is just, who cares? You know what I mean? But I felt like, I was really drawn in and invested in the narrative, how things shook out. There were certain times where, like, McMurtry would kind of veer off from the like main narrative, whether it was something with like the sheriff, July Johnson, or that sheriff's wife, Ellie. I'd find myself like starting those chapters like, I don't care about this. Like these characters aren't that interesting to me. And then by the end of that chapter, like I'd be like, oh, okay. Like I see kind of where this is going, the purpose of this, diversion. So I think that's a really like, powerful thing to be able to kind of flip the reader from being like, why is he going off on this side quest to like, oh, okay, that was a really great chapter that really adds to the book. I thought the writing was good. It was a well done Western. Good dialogue. Really felt like you were like part of the cattle drive with them. So just a really solid, good book.
Yeah, I think I would agree with most of that or all of that. I'll add that it made me realize that I don't read a lot of really character-driven works in general. But even with that said, I think that McMurtry is probably one of the best I've ever read at making you care about a character and building interesting characters and believable characters. I really did love the fact that there were so many narratives because it's a long book and I don't know if I could hang on for one character narrative through 900 pages almost.
I think this novel is a great example of how your protagonists don't have to be infallible.
Right.
Like, there were moments and without spoiling it, like there are moments with both Augustus and Call, who I think for the sake of this discussion, we can pretty safely call the protagonists.
Sure.
As I was saying, there are moments where the two of them are talking and you're either waiting for Augustus, who is kind of a nonchalant, flippant character. He's put in his time and done the work as a ranger, and now he just kind of wants to, I guess for lack of a better term, drift through life. He'd much rather just sit on the porch drinking whiskey and taking in the world around him than, get out in the field and dig a well. And then you have Call, who's, just work, very hard-nosed, kind of a stoic in a way. But, you have moments where you kind of like want either Augustus to take something seriously and just shut the hell up for 30 seconds, or you want Call to like relax and show some warmth and compassion towards other people.
Yeah.
And they don't, which is kind of upsetting as the reader, but also like either of those actions would be would be the opposite of what those characters are, or who those characters are. So like I was saying, it's a good example of like the character doesn't have to be who you want them to be. The character just has to be the character they're supposed to be. So
yeah, I thought both of them were very realistically written. I know I've known people quite a bit like Call.
Yeah.
You sometimes hear stories about this, like somebody working their whole life really hard, retiring, and then passing away very shortly after. It's kind of like their life has lost its meaning. And now we're certainly going towards a trend in society where that, like, work your whole life just to retire and die is stupid. But also, I think if you really enjoy what you do and it gives you a sense of purpose, that's fine. Like to work hard and to do it for the majority of your life. It really comes down to what you want, right? And Augustus was much more, like you said, flippant and just wanted to kind of enjoy the pleasantries of life. Now he's put in this hard career.
Yeah.
Obviously, we kind of come to find that maybe Call is masking or using work as a way to avoid acknowledging his feelings about certain things.
Yeah. Or anything.
But it Call's character reminded me of this guy. So when I was in high school, I worked a summer at a glass shop, and I worked in the kind of like factory section where I would cut aluminum frames for windows. And there was this guy there that retired the summer I was working there, and he made it 2 weeks. And 2 weeks later, he came back.
Wow.
And was like, I can't stand being at home. I just want to work.
Yeah.
You know, that's what he liked to do. He liked the camaraderie of the people, even though he was a bit of a curmudgeon.
I know quite a few people like that.
Yeah. So you and I both have some curmudgeon tendencies from time to time. But yeah, the characters were super believable and well developed, I thought. I also really think that the book did a great job of being very readable. It sucked you in. I could sit down and read chunks of this book more so than a lot of other works, you know, where it might be a bit of a struggle to focus for an hour and a half on some other works, where this was, no, I know I can sit down, crank through 100, 150 pages,
Right.
no problem, in a single sitting. I do believe it was originally written as a screenplay, so I do think that's part of why it has that kind of, there's scenes. Like
Right.
the end of every chapter has a little bit of like closure to it.
You can kind of envision the fade to black before the next scene rolls in. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this is something that John Steinbeck was actually criticized for with Of Mice and Men. People thought it was too like scene by scene, and they said, "Oh, he just wrote this because he wanted to get it turned into a film and make some money." But I don't necessarily mind that in a book if it's well done, and I do think that it was well done in Lonesome Dove.
I think it kind of fit the general vibe of the book. Like it just kind of has that sense of going from scene to scene to scene. And I don't mean that as a criticism. Like it just kind of,
No, it made it more readable, honestly.
it feels like it's how the story is supposed to be told. You know?
And with a really long book, it is nice to have those kind of very clear-cut breaks, because, you know, you're not going to read this in a day. I mean,
Right.
you maybe if you're a very, very, very fast reader.
Nothing to
you have
do.
Nothing to do. But with a long work like that, where you know you're going to stretch it out probably over a couple weeks at least, it is nice to be like, okay, I kind of hit a benchmark point. I can put the story aside for a little bit, come back to it, and feel not like I'm totally lost to where I am.
Right.
The book is incredibly funny.
Yes.
So there's a part in the book that, I mean, there's so many quotable moments, but there's one thing where they're describing life in Nebraska, and they talk about a woman who killed herself, and the suicide note was, tired of hearing all this wind, you know, and then she shot herself, which normally that's not a thing that you laugh about, but like just the way it was written made me chuckle. The banter between Gus and Call is excellent.
Yes.
So I really thought it was one of the funniest and most quotable books I've read. What I think is kind of strange is a lot of times when I'd see people on social media talking about how much they love this book or putting a quote, I felt like a lot of it was from the first like 150, 200 pages. A lot of people make a big to-do about we don't rent pigs, because Gus writes that on the sign for the Hat Creek outfit. Yeah. And that's in like the first 50 pages, maybe.
I don't also see what that has to, like.
Yeah, it's a funny,
it's a funny quip.
It's a funny quip, but it really doesn't have anything to do with the story. So when I started reading the book and they immediately are talking about, they introduce the pigs right away.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I've seen people say, we don't rent pigs like all the time. I thought that was going to be a big part of the narrative of the story, and it's not. It has nothing to do with the book. And I was like, oh, okay.
They just kind of pop up here and there.
Yeah.
I do think it was kind of funny that Gus just kind of has pigs following around the farm.
Yeah, for sure. So that was kind of interesting to me. Any other pros you want to add before we talk about what we didn't like about the book, which I think might be the longer section of this video?
You know, there were. I've said it earlier, and I've said it in the last couple of weeks during like the recaps. You know, praising the narrative here, but there is some depth. Like, I don't want it to just sound like it's just kind of this like straight story, despite what some online personalities might think. I don't think it's like the most deep substantive book that I've come across, but I think there were just, what really shocked me was like there were moments where the emotional depth just kind of like comes out. And I talked about this when I was reading The Dying Grass, where like you don't really realize like how sucked in and invested you are with the narrative and certain characters until something happens. It's like a very pivotal and emotional moment, and you're kind of left with pause of like, I can't believe that happened.
Yeah.
And you feel like moved by that. And sometimes, you know, you were talking about the readability of this book, how you could sit and read 100, 150 pages, which I think is great. But sometimes when you, in my opinion, when you read a book like that, sometimes it just kind of feels like, I don't know about you, but like I'm just turning the page. Like, you know, I'm going through it. I don't say I'm going through the motions, but like, you know, I like when I'm like reading a book and I get like, you know, I read 50 pages, and in that 51st page, something happens that like forces me to stop and reflect and sit with, whether it's like specific thoughts about what took place in that scene, or like the emotions that I'm feeling because of that. And I think McMurtry did a great job of just like, there are these moments where it's like, I gotta put the book down, even if it's for like 90 seconds, just to like pause and reconcile what just happened. So
I would agree that I had the same experience where reading it, I guess I didn't realize how attached I was becoming to some characters until they were in some sort of peril.
yeah,
And then I was kind of surprised, I'm having an emotional reaction to this. And there's lots of books that have given me emotional reactions, but more so about, again, like events
right,
or ideas, not necessarily, I just love this character and, you know, now they might die or whatever.
right.
So he did, I do think like the book kind of sets you up for one expectation in the beginning, that it's very fun and campy,
Yeah.
but there are some very violent and brutal moments to it. Some very adult topics obviously discussed.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one thing that and among a few that I thought McMurtry did very well, because there are moments of, you know, serious peril or violence, very graphic violence. That graphic violence is not always described graphically.
Yeah.
It's just kind of this like, you know, the paragraph where a character dies, whether it's a just kind of a side character they've met along the way, or someone from the Hat Creek outfit. Like the paragraph within that, where that death takes place, it'll almost be more of like describing the air around the situation.
Yeah.
You know, how it just kind of
A little
like
more foreboding.
Yeah.
Ominous.
Yes. And I thought that was beautiful, because you just get it's a much more visceral, emotional reaction. And you really feel that sense of tension and foreboding. So I thought that was really well done, the way he just kind of like, you know, more describes the scene than the action.
Yeah. All right, let's dig into maybe some of the things we didn't like about the book. And this is where I struggle a little bit, because my experience reading the book was very enjoyable. Like, I had a good time reading it, and I certainly think that was enhanced by the live discussions we did with the book club, People had some really great insights, as you would expect when you're having a group conversation about a work. People bringing up things I maybe missed a little bit, or seeing it from a different perspective that gave me some new appreciation for something that happened in the book. But there was a comment we got online early on when we first mentioned that this was the book club pick that said that Lonesome Dove is an anti-Western, where McMurtry kind of set out to write a Western that didn't check all those trope boxes. And so I looked into that a little bit more, and McMurtry's kind of mission, and this is his own words, and I kind of pieced together from a few different interviews. He wanted to demythologize the cowboy. And in American culture, cowboys are very much put on a pedestal. They are supposed to embody machismo and masculinity, and they're the hero of the story. They're the cool, they're very sexy, like in the way that they're marketed. And obviously they were like the face of Marlboro cigarettes for a long time when smoking was the cool thing. And, he wanted to demythologize the cowboy because he felt the image of the cowboy was rife with misogyny and racism, and we idolized this kind of figure, and he wanted to break that down. I think that's a very cool idea and a very noble pursuit. I do not feel like he did a very good job of it. I don't know how you feel about that.
I don't feel like he did a poor job. I feel like, maybe he could have done a better one. But I think there are, I'm trying to think of how I want to word this so I don't accidentally spoil anything. But, I think that goes back to what I was saying about how the protagonists are not infallible. I think if it was kind of more of a stereotypical Western where the cowboy is this mythological figure who is going to be the hero, maybe it wouldn't be, Call turning to Augustus and telling him how much I love and value your friendship, and I'm so glad that would have been very out of character. And maybe not this like mythological thing for like a cowboy to do, but as prominent as they are in the narrative, to me, there also weren't moments where they were like this elevated hero. At the end of the day, even with Call, how he was just work, and you have other characters in the outfit who, in a way, idolized him. Even if it was just like admiring his work ethic. At the end of the day, he was still just a guy doing a job.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like he wasn't this like, and they were well known throughout the region for their time as Rangers, which maybe that a little bit was like, how revered should they be for that? But like, also they had some heightened status, but never so much to the point that they were like heroes.
Yeah.
They were just well-respected guys doing their job.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, he kind of...
I try to remember that, okay, this book was written in 1985. So at the time, this could have been maybe a very progressive work with how women and people of color are portrayed. We're 40 years removed from 1985.
Yeah.
So a lot has changed, and I understand. I'm reading this and thinking about that concept of demythologizing the cowboy from a 2024 lens. And I have read like one or two other Westerns in my life, one of which being Cormac McCarthy's All the Pretty Horses, which probably doesn't follow any Western tropes anyway.
Yeah.
So I guess like maybe compared to other classics of the genre, this is like woke, you know what I mean? But I still think that if that was the goal, he might have missed the mark a little bit.
I mean, I think, like if he was trying to directly critique racism and misogyny, that I haven't read a ton of, I think I've read like 3 other Westerns, and none of them were like super stereotypical Westerns. But, I think if he was trying to critique the prevalence of those two things, racism and misogyny, in other Westerns, I think some of the critique was there.
Well, he had a hard job, right? Because he had to balance writing characters that were representative of how they thought and acted in the 1870s,
right?
Versus trying to show that that's maybe not the best way to live your life and the best perspectives to have,
right? But like I think about it, like there are moments where, the cowboys in the hands, they kind of, treat women poorly.
Mm-hmm.
And there were never parts where I read that and was like, oh, look how cool this cowboy is, calling the woman that works at the saloon a whore. Like,
right.
But it also was like very in character for what I expected and I think maybe in that sense that's what he was going for.
Yeah.
Where you're like, it wasn't this like direct critique, criticism or whatever, just kind of pulling the curtain back a little bit and kind of like, this is how this cultural figure that we've given this elevated status actually was day to day, So maybe his messaging and his execution could have been a little bit stronger, but I do think it was there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought up the anti-Western thing, because I did not do as much research into that ethos as you did, but I had heard about it. And as I was reading this and, having finished it, like it almost kind of made me want to read a little bit more Westerns to like see how much.
Same. I agree.
The only Westerns that I've read, All the Pretty Horses, Butcher's Crossing,
Blood Meridian,
which again, kind of the same thing as All the Pretty Horses. Like, how much of that is actually a Western? How much of that is set in a Western setting?
Yeah.
The Sisters Brothers and Warlock, and none of those are really like, stereotypical like Westerns.
They're not written by Western authors.
Yeah, when
like a Louis L'Amour or something.
Right.
Yeah,
when I think about like a Western, I kind of tend to just jump to like a spaghetti Western and
same.
Clint Eastwood and something of that ilk.
Yep.
So I haven't seen very many Western movies either. So like I think I would, maybe had I had read more of those before this, McMurtry's, game plan might have been a little bit more prominent.
Yeah.
Might have stood out a little bit more, but I think I could see what he was going with. I think, similar to what I had said recently about Marshland by Otohiko Kaga, like I think the messaging and the themes and the ideas are there, but you have to pay attention to them.
Yeah.
Like I think this is a great book that really benefits from a discussion like this, because you could read it, enjoy the narrative, enjoy the characters, enjoy the dialogue, enjoy the writing, put it down, and never think about it again.
Yeah.
Or you could sit and have this conversation and be like, now that I think about it, the Cowboys maybe weren't great people.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, you could read this and never give that a thought. Like, never think about like, what is McMurtry saying is about the cowboy as a whole.
Yeah.
It's a great book. Put it down. I'm done with it. Or you can like, what is McMurtry trying to say?
I mean, I think that and maybe this is the fault of ours as readers, but
No, I'm perfect.
a few people in the book club shared this sentiment, which I was already feeling, which was, getting towards the last third of the book, I was starting to go, so what's like the point of this exactly?
Yeah.
I think Rachel in the book club said it's just not really that thought provoking. It's entertaining, but not as thought provoking. And just maybe we're missing something pretty significant that we should have picked up on. But I think a few people in the club were voicing that opinion, and I kind of felt the same. So that my question for you, Andy, would be, what do you think is the point? What is the message of Lonesome Dove? Because you can't write a 900-page book without at least trying to communicate something, right?
I'll come back to that question, but I think everything you said leading up to it was kind of the point I was just trying to make of like, you really have to work for the point.
Yeah.
Like, if you just read it and enjoy the story, like the point and the message, I'm sure if I'm going to be able to accurately describe those things, but they're not very overt.
Yeah.
Maybe to a fault. Like,
yeah.
If you didn't go into I do think, to answer your question, that to some degree, like the anti-Western and kind of tearing down of the cowboy as a cultural hero is kind of the point.
Yeah.
Is kind of what McMurtry is trying to get at. If I wasn't reading this with that lens, like if I had never heard that was his goal, I don't think I would have gotten it.
I agree. I totally agree.
Think,
yeah.
I don't think it's a lack of message or lack of point. I think it's a lack of actually making that point, if that makes sense.
No, I completely agree with that.
It just, it could have had a little bit more.
Yeah.
There could have been a little bit more bite.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think to try to answer my own question, I do think the book was about, there was definitely some themes about like responsibility and how different people handle responsibility differently, and how maybe we're all a little bit blind to some of what our personal responsibilities are.
yeah.
Obviously there's a lot in there about like friendship and romantic relationships and family and themes like that, but they weren't super heavy-handed or overdone.
Yeah.
Turn that mic down a little bit. Perfect. There you go. I guess, I think I'm with you where it's like you could just read this and be like, that was really fun.
Yeah.
That was very entertaining, very engaging. And we've talked about this on the show before. People act as if something that's merely entertaining doesn't have value. Oh, it's not making a commentary on a social issue. Like, entertaining people is so freaking hard.
Yeah.
It's so underrated how difficult it is to do. And I would absolutely read something else by Larry McMurtry, because the dude could clearly write.
Right.
He's since passed on, but the writing was just so, it really did suck you in. The characters were just so believable and realistic to me. And distinct. They all had very distinct voices, and the dialogue felt very natural to me.
Yes.
I think when I read Inherent Vice by Pynchon and then watched the movie, it made me realize that like Pynchon's dialogue, I think, works well on the page in the context of his writing style. But then when it was spoken aloud, I was like, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like it just didn't convert well, where I don't get that sense with the dialogue in Lonesome Dove. I felt like it was very organic sounding. And again, maybe that's because it started off as a screenplay and it was meant to be spoken aloud. But, the guy is definitely a seriously talented writer. So we talked about what we liked. We talked about what we didn't like. We're going to shift into our spoiler section for the Patreon members in just a moment. But where does this kind of rank for you? I don't necessarily care if you want to give it a star, 5-star, 1 to 5-star rating or not, but is this in the conversation for the Great American Novel? Is it in the top 10?
No.
Where is it in your personal rankings? Top 100?
Maybe. I maybe.
Yeah.
For most of the book, I would have put it under that category of books that are good but not great.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe it was because it was like one of the few like actual binging sessions I had with it. Maybe it was just because of the actual quality of that section. But the last like 100, 150-ish pages or so, like really grabbed me. I thought that like where everything kind of came to a head was really powerful, which is a hard thing to do because, sometimes it's hard to end a story in an effective way without it just kind of being like, and now it's over.
Right. Right.
I think I would elevate it to being really good, just not quite great. I would not disagree. I don't think I would disagree with someone if they said it was one of their favorite books. Like I get why they might feel that way. And maybe they'll in turn read some of my favorite books and they'll shift their thinking.
Yeah.
It certainly is not going to be one of my favorites.
Yeah.
But I wholeheartedly disagree with the Great American Novel or one of the best books of all time. I think with what McMurtry was trying to go for in terms of kind of humanizing the cultural figure of the cowboy, I think that was, a very, very powerful and in some ways important thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think had it maybe been executed a little bit better, and that's not to say he did a poor job executing it.
Right.
Just maybe took more of a stand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that like I was saying, without having gone in and reading it, like knowing that that's what McMurtry was trying to do, I don't think that whole theme would have been as obvious.
Yeah.
I think if there was more within the novel that made it clear that was one of the goals of the novel, I think then it could be elevated to that conversation of the Great American Novel. Because like we were talking about earlier, like the cowboy is this icon of American history and of the American culture. And I do think there's a place and an importance in pulling back the curtain and revealing what that archetype actually was.
Yeah.
I just think that, McMurtry did a very good, very solid job of doing that. It could have been a little bit more, it could have been stronger. Could have taken us, like I said, taken a stand and said, instead of just kind of peeling the curtain back, just blown them wide open and showed the whole picture.
I have 3 things to say about what you just mentioned. I have a similar feeling about where I would rank it as far as you would, but I would actually categorize this book as great with the caveat that it wasn't great for me. I think it is a great book. It has something that a lot of books don't have that makes it great. It's just not the things that I look for in a quote unquote great book.
Yeah. I think that's a better way to put it.
Yeah. Like when I think of books that are good but not great, I think this is a cut above a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
I I'm not maybe the exact right reader for Lonesome Dove.
Yeah.
We all read for different reasons, and this book just didn't have enough of those my personal reasons for me.
Yeah.
When it comes to talking about those themes and that mission of McMurtry and demythologizing the cowboy, and we talked about how we don't really feel like that mission was fully accomplished and maybe we missed it. One thing I will say about it is one person said to us in the comments, "Oh, it's an anti-Western, that's what makes it so great." Literally every other interaction I had online about this book, which was a lot. When you mention this book on social media, a lot of people comment. It's so funny. It's, "Oh, I loved Gus. Oh, I loved Lorena." No one mentions these bigger themes, this demythologizing, this attack on racism, this breaking down to misogyny. So in my opinion, it's not that we necessarily missed it. It's like, if that's what the kind of casual reader is getting out of it, then I agree. He didn't take a hard enough stand in the writing. But in McMurtry's defense, I did read an interview where the interviewer asked him, "Do you think that we've done it? Do you think we've demythologized the cowboy?" And he said, "No, I think we failed." And this was many, many years after he wrote the novel, and I don't think he was saying I sucked and I didn't do it. I think putting the responsibility on McMurtry to him alone to demythologize the cowboy is a little too much to ask. But he did say in the interview, no, people still think of it the same way. There's still media coming out in modern day with this kind of typical cowboy, white savior, narrative.
Yeah. I think, I mean, it's such a romanticized persona.
Yes.
I mean, you think about a show like Yellowstone. I mean, how much did everyone get swept up in that?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I got sucked in for 4 seasons.
Yeah, minor spoiler for Yellowstone here. I'd be curious to know when did you abandon that show? Because it was a very clear moment for me.
I think I got all the way through the first 4 seasons. I don't remember a single.
Okay.
Maybe I got through 5 seasons. I don't remember. But one of the seasons where at the end almost all of them die. And then none of them end up dying.
Yeah.
I think I watched
Some serious plot armor.
Yeah, I think I watched the season after that and then just kind of lost interest. But anyway, where I'm going with this, there's no bigger example of how the wrongdoings of a cowboy have been overlooked based on their how they've been romanticized and as a cultural figure and as a hero of the American West or whatever.
Yeah.
Than Rip Wheeler.
Yes.
Yes. By all accounts, that guy is a psychopath.
Yes.
It's just a
literal serial killer.
Yes.
Yeah.
But how many people are "Oh my God, Rip is the best."
Oh, men want to be him, women want to be with him. That old saying, yeah, for sure.
I'll tell you right now, there were times where I was watching that show where I was I want to be that guy.
Yeah.
I
mean, he is kind of badass, but he's a scumbag for sure.
Right there.
Right.
He's kind of a badass. Everyone's I want to be him, but it's he just killed 6 people in last week's episode.
Right.
Why do you want to be that? Why are you idolizing that guy?
Yeah. Well, you have a tortured past, Andy, okay?
Just further proving my point.
Yeah.
So, I think it's very admirable of what, again, I've said it a number of times already. I think it was admirable of what McMurtry was trying to do. Just a lot of bark with very little bite.
Yeah. All right. I think that concludes everything we have to say without giving any spoilers away. It is a little bit difficult to critique a work without getting into specifics, which we're going to do now for our Patreon audience. So the link is in the description. And I think we talked about doing an Infinite Jest episode next week because I'll probably be done by then. But I think next week we should do our green flags. episode
Okay.
because people really enjoyed the red flags and a couple of people asked about green flags. And that'll also give me some time to just finish up and kind of collect my thoughts about Infinite Jest.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've read it, obviously. I think I joked about it when you told me that you were reading it. I'm glad you kept it as a surprise. Because if you were like, I'm going to start reading Infinite Jest, like you did with The Tunnel. Like, I probably would have had to pull it off the shelf and read with you.
It's just a long freaking book.
Yeah. So I have to, like, kind of prepare my thoughts as well.
For
kind
sure.
of refresh my memory of some things. So,
Yeah. All right. Well, hope you enjoyed. See you next week.